There were no complications. Lewis did make a last statement. She said, "I just want Kathy to know I love her, and I'm very sorry."
It's a terrible, appalling thing to execute Teresa Lewis.
Are out of prison, and now that we have a vehicle to keep a person in prison for the balance of their lives, it just changes the equation. At one time had more people on death row than any other county in Texas.
That's how her day has gone so far.
Number 6, Teresa Lewis. Teresa Lewis, 41 years old, perished by injection at 9:13 p.m. local time on 23 September 2010. She became the first woman punished in this way in Virginia in nearly a century. Lewis was sentenced to her end after she was convicted of arranging the slayings of her husband and a stepson over a $250,000 insurance payment. Lewis enticed 2 men through sex, cash, and a promised cut in an insurance policy to shoot the sleeping men in October 2002. Both gunmen were sentenced to life in prison, and one took his own life in 2006. Lewis appeared fearful, her jaw clenched, as she was escorted into the chamber at Grenville Correctional Center. She glanced tensely around at 14 prison officials before being bound to a gurney with heavy leather straps. Moments before she parted, Lewis asked if her husband's daughter was near. She had been convicted of enticing 2 men to destroy her husband, Julian Clifton. Kathy Clifton, Julian's daughter, and Lewis's stepdaughter was in an adjacent witness room blocked from Lewis's view by a two-way mirror. Her last words were, "I want Kathy to know that I love her and I'm very sorry." Then, as the drugs flowed into her body, her feet bobbed, but she otherwise remained motionless.
Lewis did make a last statement. She said, "I just want Kathy to know I love her, and I'm very sorry." The execution of Teresa Lewis has been carried out in the manner as prescribed by the laws of the Commonwealth of Virginia.
It's a terrible, appalling thing to execute Teresa Lewis.
Death was pronounced at 9:13 p.m. There were no complications.
A guard lightly tapped her on the shoulder reassuringly as she slipped into extinction. Her spiritual advisor, the Reverend Julie Perry, stood sobbing as she witnessed the execution, clutching a religious book. Her stepdaughter said she believes in redemption, but is not sure if her stepmother will find it. Number 5, Kimberly McCarthy. Kimberly McCarthy was convicted and sentenced to her end for the 1997 slaying of her neighbor, 71-year-old retired college professor Dorothy Booth, in her Texas home during a robbery. After her final federal appeal was denied in July 2012, McCarthy's punishment date was set for January 29, 2013. 2 reprieves pushed her punishment date to June 26, 2013. McCarthy continued to proclaim her innocence, saying she was framed for the slaying, but to no avail. McCarthy was punished by lethal injection at a Huntsville unit in Huntsville, Texas on June 26, 2013. Her punishment marked the 500th convicted person to be fatally punished by lethal injection in Texas, which averages one such punishment about every 4 weeks, since the capital punishment resumed in the U.S. in 1976.
Are out of prison, and now that we have a vehicle to keep a person in prison for the balance of their lives, it just changes the equation. At one time had more people on death row than any other county in Texas. Time that a person goes to trial until that person is finally executed. There are a number of safeguards in the system. I think a lot of the issues concerning future dangerousness, I've had a lot of the appeals of capital cases. And that provides for a lot of expensive avenues to make sure that the conviction and death sentence is sound, stemmed around the fact of whether or not a person would be a danger in prison.
She was the first woman fatally punished in this way in the U.S. in almost 3 years. She was pronounced deceased at 6:37 p.m., 20 minutes after Texas prison officials began administering a single lethal dose of pentobarbital. Her last words were, "This is not a loss, this is a win. You know where I'm going. I'm going home to be with Jesus. Keep the faith. I love you all." Number 4, Suzanne Basso. Suzanne Basso held back tears and smiled at her friends as she became the 14th woman to be fatally punished in America since the resumption of capital punishment. The 59-year-old woman was found guilty in 1999 of leading a group of thugs to viciously torture and slaughter Louis Buddy Musso, a mentally disabled man she convinced to move with her to Texas with the promise of marriage. Fatal punishments of women are uncommon in the U.S., and only 5 women in Texas have been put to their end since the Supreme Court resumed capital punishment in 1976. Texas, which executes the most end-row convicts out of any state, has stopped giving last meal requests so Basso had the same dinner as all the other inmates: baked chicken, fish, boiled eggs, carrots, green beans, and sliced bread. In 2014, Basso was led to the execution room around 2:15 p.m. wearing her white prison uniform. When asked by the warden if she had any last words, Basso said, "No, sir." She seemed to be holding back tears when she smiled at two friends watching through the window. She mouthed a word to them and nodded before being injected with the lethal drug pentobarbital. After the lethal injection, Basso began to snore, though the snoring became less audible and eventually stopped. She was officially pronounced deceased at 6:26 p.m., 11 minutes after the drug was administered. Number 3. Lisa Ann Coleman. A Texas woman was punished with the capital punishment in 2014 after spending the last 8 years on end row for the slaying of her girlfriend's son a decade ago. Lisa Ann Coleman, 38 years old at the time, of Arlington, Texas, was found guilty of capital slaying in the demise of 9-year-old Devontae Williams, who had been beaten and bound and whose body bore more than 250 scars when officials discovered him on July 26, 2004. He had also been starved, weighing a mere 35 pounds at the time of his demise. Coleman was given a lethal injection sometime after 6 p.m. and was pronounced dead at 6:23, according to reporter Richard Ray, who acted as a media witness to the punishment.
That's how her day has gone so far. She has had an opportunity to make some phone calls if she wants to some other people, and so she's had a chance to visit with relatives, spiritual advisor, attorneys today.
Ray said the punishment was very peaceful and that he only heard a short gasp before Coleman passed. Ahead of her end, Coleman told the jailer she was at peace with the punishment. She said, "I'm ready. I know where I am going. I'm not bitter, just ready." She spent the days playing word games with her friend, Routier, before being transferred to Huntsville for the lethal injection. Before the punishment, she was given the opportunity to see family and spiritual advisors and make phone calls. 5 family members and friends bore witness to Coleman's punishment. No one showed up to represent the victim, Devontae. Her last words were directed at her fellow inmate, Darlie Routier. She said, "Tell them I finished strong." She then smiled and blew kisses at the supporters gathered and added, "God bless you all." Number 2. Eileen Warnos. In 2002, Eileen Warnos was fatally punished by Florida authorities via lethal injection for slaughtering at least 6 men. Warnos was suspected of the demise of another man, but his body was never found, nor was she officially charged with the crime. Per standard procedure, Warnos was offered one final meal before her punishment, as well as a chance to say her final words before she perished. The meal that Warnos chose and the words that she said before her demise reflect the troubled mind frame and the mental challenges Warnos lived with throughout her life. Despite her conviction, Warnos was a tragic figure. Some might be familiar with Warnos' story from actress Charlize Theron's Oscar-worthy portrayal of the convicted assassin in the 2003 movie Monster. Warnos came from a broken home. She grew up with her grandparents, and when her grandmother passed, her grandfather, whom Warnos alleged had physically exploited her, threw her out. Warnos also alleged an incestuous relationship with her brother. At that time, Warnos was left to live alone in the woods. As an adult, Warnos led a vagabond life of sex work and hitchhiking, only crossing paths with the law on occasion. From late 1989 to the fall of 1990, Warnos and Moore left a trail of 6 slain men behind them. A sex worker who picked up men only to then shoot and rob them, Warnos pled guilty to slaughtering one man, Richard Mallory, claiming at first it was self-defense. She later recanted that statement. Warnos went on trial for destroying 5 more men and admitted to that 7th slaying for which she was never charged. Warnos, in her final words, stated the following on October 9, 2002, before she passed by lethal injection. "I'd just like to say I'm sailing with the Rock and I'll be back like Independence Day with Jesus, June 6. Like the movie, big mothership and all, I'll be back."
I am prepared to die if you say it is necessary. I am sorry that my acts of self-defense ended up in court like this. I am sorry for all the pain that my actions have caused. I have made peace with my Lord and I have asked forgiveness. It was them or me. But I take full responsibility for my actions. Thank you. And probably see, I'll be up in heaven while y'all are rotting in hell.
Case number 91-112, Citrus County case number. To death for the murder of Troy Burris. I sentence you to death for the murder of Charles Humphreys. I sentence you to death for the murder of David Spears. Case number 91-304. I sentence you in case number 91-463.
I'm okay. I'm okay. God is going to be there. Jesus Christ is going to be there. All the angels and everything. I'm all right. I'm all right with it.
You know, I was just wondering how you're going to be, at 9:30 tomorrow morning. Are you prepared?
I'm prepared. Remember, let them know that I know that I left prints everywhere and they covered it up. I know they did because I was no professional.
How?
I'm all right with it, but like I said, serial killer or anything, murderer or whatever you want to call it, The cops knew who I was after Richard Mallory died and let me kill the rest of those guys to turn me into a serial killer.
Independence Day was an apparent reference to the 1996 Will Smith sci-fi movie. Warnos' final meal, reportedly just a cup of coffee, was no less unusual. Number 1. Kelly Gissendaner. A Georgia woman who was given the capital punishment despite a plea for mercy from Pope Francis sang Amazing Grace until she was given a lethal injection in 2015. Kelly Renee Gissendaner, who graduated from a theology program in prison, was put to her end at 12:21 a.m. after a flurry of last-minute appeals failed. Gissendaner, who was sentenced to her end for the 1997 fatal knifing of her husband at the hands of her lover, sobbed as she called the victim an amazing man who perished because of me. She was the first woman punished in Georgia in 70 years, and one of a handful of end-row inmates who were punished this way, even though they did not physically partake in a slaying. The mother of 3 was nearly punished before, but the lethal injection was abruptly called off because the chemicals appeared cloudy. After a new date was set, Gissendaner, 47 years old at the time, convinced the Georgia Board of Pardons and Paroles to reconsider her application for clemency. In an extraordinary turn, Pope Francis, who called for a global ban on the capital punishment during his U.S. visit later on, urged the board to spare her life. Shortly thereafter, the board announced that it would not stop the punishment. The victim's family was split on whether Gissendaner should live or not. Her children appeared before the parole board to ask that their mom be spared the chamber, but her husband's relatives said she did not deserve clemency. Nothing worked, however, and she requested her final meal, cheese dip with chips, Texas fajita nachos, and a diet frosted lemonade. That's all for today's video. See you next time.